You know, if there's anything Lagatha here hates, it's wokeness, especially when it infects every aspect of our culture. And it's even been infecting the military, right? Like one of the last holdouts against wokeism was the military. And let's face it, the left knew that. So how did they try to infiltrate? Well, they did it through ROTC programs. They did it through the service academies. They did it through senior ranking officials that cared more about being 4-star generals than they did about preserving the very things that makes a military effective. But there appears to be a new dawn taking place within the military. And I have to say this as a parent who's recently sent my son off to the military. That's right. He is on his way to the Fort Benning School for Wayward Boys, the one I went to.
Oh, no. Fort Moore, honey.
Fort Benning. Fort Benning. Although I will say this, Moore was an incredible soldier and veteran. So all respect to Moore. But he's headed down to Fort Benning to go through infantry training, airborne school, ranger assessment, all that stuff. And I got to tell you, when my son first wanted to enlist, first wanted to go into the military, I'm certainly proud of him, but also a little bit concerned about the sort of military he's going to be going into. But there appears to be some changes taking place. We're going to discuss all of that today. But the first thing that we're going to go through is we're going to actually talk about how bad it got. Because I think a lot of people have this kind of vague inclination that, it was getting a little bit, more woke, and we were certainly frustrated by what we were seeing. But I don't know that most people understand just how ridiculous and absurd it has gotten and how drastic the change has been since Trump has been elected and Pete Hegseth has been confirmed as the Secretary of Defense, because he is going for it when it comes to removing a lot of the various policies which I think had a detrimental effect on the United States military, but has also led to what we like to refer to as malicious compliance. That's where the mid-level bureaucrats that have implemented a lot of these policies are doing their level best to try to keep their jobs. And they've got ways that they're trying to subvert the process. So on this episode, we're going to talk about how bad it really got. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm telling you, you're going to love some of these recruiting commercials. Yeah. I'm about to just fry these recruiting commercials. But how good it's starting to get again, and the hope that we all have and what we should expect over the next couple of years. Because again, there's one thing we know, it's that the left fights back, and they do so in interesting ways. And we're going to talk about what you should look for, as well as, again, some of the ways that Hegseth and others have fought back, which is pretty not only good, but comical in nature. All of that and more coming up on this episode of Making the Argument. I am your host, Nick Freitas, member of the Virginia House of Delegates, but other than that, a reasonably good guy. With me in the studio is Lagatha. Lagatha is in the studio, sitting on my left. And of course, my beautiful bride, Tina, Queen of the Bees.
Hello, everyone.
I just screwed with our cameraman there. Sorry, Nate. And then, of course, our resident historian, our political prognosticator, the Oracle of Virginia, Christian Hines. How are you doing, man?
I just forgot to change out of my clothes from the previous episode.
That's okay.
I just want to joke with our
Christian
audience.
Doesn't change. He just wears his jammies.
This
here
is
anyway.
it. Jam time.
I have to bring this up to not make myself look like a total shut-in. So Nick is in Richmond usually, right? But this week he's able to be in the studio with us. But because he's in Richmond, we've been having to record episodes back to back in a short amount of time. Well, here I am still wearing the same clothes as Tuesday's episode. So
that's not true. This is filmed several days later. He just wears the same thing every time.
In fact, this is live.
Yeah. Okay.
It's my fault. It's my fault.
Let's go ahead and jump into this. Now, I think the first thing that we need to acknowledge, and this is important, is that I don't want to suggest that unless you believe the way that we do, you can't faithfully serve your country. I've served with people that I didn't agree with politically who were very competent and courageous members of the military. So, right? So this is not to say that unless you love Donald Trump or unless you're on the right, that somehow you can't be a good soldier, you can't love your country. But I think it's fair to say that there are a lot of people on the left, especially the progressive left, who view the military very, very differently than not just people that are more conservative or libertarian, but the people that would have been, Main Street Democrats 30 years ago. They view the military very differently with respect to what they see the military as. Some of them see it as nothing more than kind of a petri dish for social engineering. Some of them see it as, a civil works, force that they can utilize in order to deploy and take care of disasters, which that might be a function of the military, but it's not their core function. And ultimately, I think many people on the left see the military as kind of a holdout, kind of an organization which stands against the latest and woke progressive ideology. And so they've seen the military almost kind of with a lens of hostility. It's one of the things I see too is a lot of times when I see the left talking about the military, they talk about the veterans as if they're victims. They talk about them as a potential as a potential constituency based off of handouts that they can provide veterans. But it's usually not out of any sort of respect for what the military actually does, which is train in order to be prepared and, if necessary, go out and kill people and break things in order to support the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That's their core function. And so you can probably imagine that doesn't necessarily jive with modern woke progressivism. And so they have done their level best to try to infiltrate into the military, again, primarily through the university system, but through other mechanisms as well, in order to try to kind of change on a fundamental level what the military is, how it sees itself, and even how it functions and what its primary duties and responsibilities are. I mean, when you have people in the military talking about, well, gosh, one of the primary threats to the United States is climate change, and the U.S. military needs to reorganize itself in order to properly address that. You can tell you have people that have an agenda that goes way beyond any understanding of what the United States military actually, exists for. And if you wanted some examples of this, if it's not just, Nick flying off the handle, blaming everything on woke, let's go ahead and look at our first article here. And I want to talk about this from the Joint Chiefs of or the former Joint Chief, General Mark Milley. And he was defending teaching critical race theory at West Point. And if you watch this, especially the House hearing on this, where he was coming and he was speaking, you can tell that he gets a little bit frustrated, like, how dare anybody in Congress? And specifically, he was going after Matt Gaetz, but he was also going after Mike Waltz. Mike Waltz is a former Green Beret. I knew Mike before he was ever in politics. He's now the national security advisor for Trump. And he was going after both of these guys because Mike Waltz and Matt Gaetz were bringing up some pretty important questions about why are you giving, you're not just teaching critical theory as, maybe because he talked about, he goes, well, I've read Marx, I've read Lenin. That doesn't mean I'm a communist. Okay, I'm old enough to remember that the way we read Marx and Lenin, the way that we talked about communism within military culture was not, well, this is an equally valid viewpoint. It was, here's the bad guys, right? That's not how they were talking about critical theory. But General Milley gets up here. And again, I want to point something out. General Milley has an SF tab. You look at General Milley like, oh my gosh, second award of Combat Infantryman's Badge, Special Forces tab, Ranger tab. General Milley is literally the only Green Beret I know of where I can go into our social media chats where you can only be a member of those chat if you're an SF guy, if you're a tabbed guy. And I would ask, does anybody know this guy from when he actually served in SF? I couldn't find one guy to actually defend him. Now, I've had other Green Berets I didn't particularly like, that somebody would always come on and say, hey, look, regardless of what he's like now, he was a really good team leader, or he was a good team sergeant, or he was a great guy when he was a senior Bravo, or whatever it was. Not with this guy. I couldn't find one guy to defend General Milley. They all looked at him as a political climber, even when he was a captain in SF. Now, maybe someone else feels differently about him, but I got to tell you right now, I am very frustrated by a guy that's wearing all of that is going out there, that doesn't have the guts to say, hey, President Biden, I don't think this is the best policies. I don't think these are the things that we should be pushing. But instead, he spent his time saying, well, I want to understand white rage. I want to understand, what caused all these people to storm the Capitol on January 6th. Fair enough. I don't mind understanding critical theory, but he defended it as, well, this is a legal theory that came out of Harvard. Of course, we should be properly understanding it. Critical theory is completely antithetical to the sort of constitutional system that we have within the United States, a system which has been designed not only around representative government, but limited representative government, which also values property rights, individual liberty, self-determination, personal responsibility. Go read critical theory and tell me that any of that is valued within that particular system. And they weren't going through and just analyzing this as one theory among many. No, they were having very, very specific speakers come in who were advocates of critical race theory and critical theory in general, teaching this at West Point. And so for General Milley to say that this is just another robust analysis that we're conducting of another theory out there. No, it wasn't, General Milley, and you know it. And someone tell me how it's good for the good order and discipline of the military to essentially look at all of your cadets out there, the future, the primary officer corps of the United States military, and say, yeah, we're going to spend a lot of time elevating a theory which essentially says that all of you are inherently racist based off of your skin color, and you fall into one of two categories, oppressor or oppressed, and you fall into those categories based off of your skin color. Yeah, that sounds like a real good theory to be promoting within a military.
It was good for him.
Where you're going to have to go out and conduct military operations and depend on the person to your right or your left, not based off of superficial characteristics such as skin color, but based off of competence, capability, and character. So
Well, it was good for him. You mentioned he was basically a climber. And he could see the writing on the wall. He could see the direction things were going. And we were going at a breakneck speed into woke full force. And it didn't look like we were going to come out of it anytime soon. So he was just shoring up his bets. He was making sure that he would continue to have appointments and continue to have jobs.
Well, he read the writing on the wall. Now listen.
He incorrectly read the writing on the wall.
Yeah, he did. Well, and I'm so glad that General Milley was so concerned about West Point cadets being exposed to critical race theory. I'm so glad we were concerned about that rather than, I don't know, the necessary skill sets and capabilities to manage the withdrawal from Afghanistan so it didn't happen in a way to where we lost a bunch of people, lost a bunch of allies, and handed over billions of dollars worth of military equipment to the Taliban. So maybe if his dumb wasn't so focused on understanding white rage and a little bit more focused on the proper good order and discipline of the United States military, maybe if he had actually had the courage to stand up to the president and say, Mr. President, if you're going to conduct this in such a manner, we're going to lose people, we're going to lose allies, we're going to arm our enemies. And if you're going to conduct it that way, Mr. President, I cannot continue to stay within this position. But that would have included something called self-sacrifice, or what we call in the military selfless service, which happens to be a core Army value. But no, we couldn't rely on General Milley. No. More importantly, the people that were serving overseas in a position of danger couldn't rely on General Milley to do his job because he had his head so far up the woke of the people that were instituting policies like this that people died as a result. And yeah, I'm a little bent out of shape about it. Anyways, he's not there anymore, thank God, because it would be horrifying for me to send my son off into the military to have to serve under somebody like that. But if anybody wants a good example of the sort of crap that was going through the United States military under the Biden administration, that's a good example of it. But it gets worse. It gets worse. As late as, let's go to the next article here. As late as 2024, West Point accused of going woke after suddenly dropping duty, honor, country from the mission statement. Now, they go on to explain that no, duty, honor, country is still a component of what we teach at West Point. It's still all over here. But as we write our mission statement, we had to incorporate the Army values. We incorporated other things. And we've done this 9 other times in West Point's history. So this is not unique. No, it is unique. It is unique. I love it when they all jump to try to say, no, we're just doing a reevaluation based off of, reassessments of what our overall mission is and our core component. One of the things that is so important about West Point is that it's been around for over 200 years. 1802 was when West Point became the official United States Military Academy. And there have been certain components about that have remained amazingly consistent over time. And it's one of the things that makes West Point the premier U.S. military academy in the world, or one of the premier military academies in the world. And so when you start to change, when you start to see them change things, and they immediately come out, no, nobody's doing that. We're just reassessing based off of, modern assessments of our needs and our capabilities and what our core functions are. And so no, duty, honor, Anytime they change something which has been a core fundamental component of an institution, and they tell you they're not, no, it's no big deal. It's a big deal. Mm-hmm. It's a big deal. Because what is the 4-step process every single time the woke left does this? That's not happening. Why do you care if it's happening? Okay, it's happening, but it's actually a good thing. And then finally, if you don't like what's happening, you're a racist, sexist bigot. Those are the 4 steps every single time. And so for any of the people that wanted to try to change this is removing the duty, honor, country. You may look at this and go, what's the big deal, Nick? Because it has been such a fundamental element, a fundamental core component of the military academy, that when you start messing with things like that, it is almost never benign. It's almost never a casual oversight. It's almost never just a slight reassessment of priorities. It almost always signals something bigger. Let's go to the next.
Did they swap it out for diversity as our strength?
Yeah, diversity is our strength, right? Climate change is our greatest threat. All right. And again, we're not just talking, and again, if you're looking at this going, well, okay, Nick, what's the big deal? We're talking about a couple things that were taught at a specific, U.S. military academy. We're talking about the whole duty, honor, country thing. Hey, they still had it written on all the walls. Who cares if they took it out of a mission statement, right? But then we also see things like this. The U.S. Air Force promoted drag events on military bases, internal documents show. So go ahead and scroll down here a little bit. Freedom of Information Act documents obtained by Judicial Watch and CatholicVote.org purport to show that U.S. Air Force has used taxpayer money to promote drag shows, drag queen story hours, and other LGBT pride events for military personnel and their children. After multiple no records responses to the repeated inquiries, the U.S. Department of Defense ultimately released 25 pages of documents detailing the funding of drag events on U.S. military installations, according to the conservative watchdog group Judicial Watch. So again, right, this isn't happening. No one's doing this. Right, malicious compliance. Right, in this case, it's obfuscation. It's the bureaucracy working against you in order to try to make it difficult to find what you know is going on.
It's kind of like when you do a FOIA request and they release like 50,000 pages, so that
they either try to. Well, now they don't do that as much anymore
because we can keyword search now.
It's so easy to keyword search. So now what they do is they send you a bill. They say, okay, yeah, we can find all this documentation, but it's going to cost us $4,000 in order to hire people to research through it, get everything you want, and send it to you. I actually had legislation on in Virginia on this because what they were doing is they would tell you, you'd put in a FOIA request and they'd tell you, okay, we got all the documentation. It's going to be $2,000. Wait, what? Yeah, it took us $2,000 worth of labor hours to do it. So you owe us that now. We just carried simple legislation that said before you charge anybody, you're going to tell them, hey, we think it's going to charge this much. And the reason I did that in part is because when they come back and they say, I think it's going to be $2,000, I like it when my constituents call me and then I call up that agency and I say, how much are you going to charge? Why? Okay, good. Well, I'll be interested to look at your budget items next year. Oh, and then all of a sudden they find a cheaper way to do it or they find a free way to do it. Amazing how that works. But anyways, this is another core example of people within the military engaging in an activity or a behavior or spending patterns that they were attempting to hide. Why? Why if they're so proud about it? Why if it's such a good thing?
Well, because we're bigots. We're bigots.
Nick, I have a brief question for you. From your own personal experience, and I know that you were in the Army kind of before the Great Awakening, but how much of this would you say is similar to the Long March through the institutions? Because the military is a unique institution compared to other ones.
I think it is. I remember when Nick went up to West Point at one point to speak to a class, and it was already at that point starting to veer that direction.
This is where you had the big push under the Obama administration so under Bill Clinton, like things like don't ask, don't tell. So it used to be you couldn't be homosexual and serve in the military. Then it was don't ask, don't tell. So we're not going to ask you. You don't advertise it, but you still can't do it. And then under Obama, they fully removed it. And the same thing about women in combat. And I remember I had a buddy of mine who I had served in SF with, and he asked me to come up and speak to his cadets. I said, "Do you really want a former Special Forces non-commissioned officer to talk to your cadets?" He goes, "I absolutely do." So I went up there and I asked questions, and it was amazing how many of the questions were around like cultural issues. So it wasn't even discussions about how do we better lead troops in combat. It wasn't about digging into the nature of the relationship between senior enlisted and officers and the roles that we would play in supporting one another in combat operations. A lot of it from certain students was more rooted in this idea of pushing a particular cultural agenda. And I found myself asking the question like, okay, but what's the overall benefit to the U.S. military in order to do X, Y, or Z? It
was like social experiments.
It was there was some level. So, okay, let's be fair. There were some people that used the whole claim that the military is not a petri dish for social engineering to keep like black people out of military units. That didn't make any sense. right? That was done. In fact, I'm going to get to this later on this whole example of the Tuskegee Airmen. The whole point is that you should never deprive your units capable people based off of, racism, bigotry, sexism. You shouldn't do that. By the same token, we should be allowed to take into account practical considerations. So for instance, one of the reasons why we don't typically have women in line infantry units is because line infantry units historically have had to operate out separate from other, separate from what we might call some of the comforts associated with the rear echelon in dangerous situations where upper body strength and the ability to, not have to worry about feminine hygiene products is pretty paramount, right? If you have to engage in trench warfare, that's not the most conducive spot for someone that can potentially get pregnant, right? Or has additional hygiene concerns and considerations.
Or is just physically weaker.
Or just physically, on average, not.
That's assuming a woman could make it through and pass the exact same standards as men, but that's not the way that they did this. This is not the way they ever do this.
Yeah.
They changed the standards for women. The run time's different. The number of push-ups is different. The number of sit-ups is different. The number of pull-ups is different. They literally change every single standard for women. And if a woman really wants to go in there and do it, it's like, okay, let's first have the conversation on, let's have it be completely equal and not reduce our standards down to a level that's ridiculous. The enemy doesn't care if you're a woman and give you a head start for that purpose.
The argument I had with this female cadet when she asked me about it, and she asked me about women in combat armed situations, I said, well, we do have women in combat armed situations, but we typically exclude it for the combat armed situations that make sense, right? Like line infantry units doesn't, on average, make sense. It's like, well, what if they can pass the same standards? I'm like, then why do you have a separate PT test? You can talk all day long about you got a 300. You didn't get a 300 on a male PT test. You got a 300 score on a female PT test.
Right.
Which is different than mine. You don't have to do what I have to do.
It's not the same
in order to
test.
achieve the same score.
Yeah.
Now, the argument is are there some women that can pass a male PT test and get a 3? Yep.
But they're incredibly rare.
It's very, very rare. It's far and few between. I said the other component here is there's health issues. There's medical issues associated with it. Again, you can get pregnant. I cannot, regardless of what Democrats want to say nowadays. If you can get pregnant, that degrades the fighting capability of my unit when we have to deploy. Now, should that prevent you from being in an infantry unit? Well, that's a debate that we can have, but it's not a consideration we can ignore.
And women are a softer target than men.
Well, the other issue I said is there's also a cultural consideration here. And this is the part that she got upset about. She's like, so I'm not allowed to serve in this unit because men are overly protective of women. I said, well, do you want to live in a society where men are not protective of women? Do you want to live in a society where men do not see a woman as someone that they have some sort of moral or social obligation to protect from aggression? Well, why do you have to see me any different from men? Are you different? Like, are you no different? Is that the argument that we're making here? Would we be better off if we had a society where men just saw women as no different when it came to physical prowess? Woman gets in a fight. Well, I guess she's on her own. I wouldn't necessarily get involved in a fight between two guys that were fighting it out. But if I saw a guy hitting a woman, I would walk over and clock him. Do you not want me to have that inclination anymore? Would we be better as a society? Is it so important that women serve in frontline combat units that we essentially degrade that cultural component with the way that we view things? I said, here's another one that I asked, and this came up with actually the gays serving in the military as well. Now, have there been homosexuals that served in the military honorably? Yes. Yes, there have. The question is from a policy perspective, they're like, well, what's the big deal? I said, okay, well, a lot of times in the military, we serve in open bay showers. Would you be comfortable if I was showering with your daughter? No. Okay, well, that's the dynamic that you add in there when you have sexual attraction between two people within a particular unit. And again, the difference with a frontline combat unit is that you are expected to conduct extensive combat military operations, for an undisclosed period of time, right? There's things that are conducive to that environment and things that are not conducive to that environment. Again, if you want to have a healthy debate on what the trade-offs are associated, fine. You do not get to tell me that the conditions, you do not get to tell me the considerations don't exist, and that the only thing that can possibly explain my attitude is I'm just mean, or I'm bigoted, or I'm sexist.
Based on this conversation that we just had, it seems to me, as an outsider, like it was the exact same process. It was the long march through the institutions just applied to the military, because one of the defining characteristics of the long march through the institutions were that conservatives treated the institutions as neutral, right? And the processes that govern those institutions as morally neutral, as an even playing field. And the left did not, right? The left actively sought to leverage any of those rules or traditions or procedures to their benefit. And when they didn't operate to their benefit, they sought to tear down those processes. And so when we say things like, well, the military is not a petri dish for your social experimentation, if that's applied in a morally neutral sense, that's how you get wokeism taking over the military, because suddenly you're not allowed to say, well, no, I don't think women should be in a combat situation.
Yeah, because now you're a sexist, right? It's not motivated by it because, again,
you have to default to, well, as long as they're equal.
Yeah.
Right? Or as long as they meet the same standards.
But they
then
aren't
eventually
they never meet the same standards.
What inevitably happens is that you have now opened the door inadvertently to the next stage of the process, which is a degradation of those standards, right? A deterioration of those standards. So it's no longer just about equal standards, because then you get into, well, it's a disparate impact, right? We need a different standard system.
Exactly.
You get a disparate impact, and then you have disparities. And if you have disparities, then you have to change your policies in order to have equity.
Pete Hegseth already addressed that, because when he said we need all of the standards to, basically they're going to review the standards and make sure no standards are lowered. There's no reason to lower any standards. And like women's standards are just going to have to be higher, because it is absolutely absurd and unequal to have two completely different run times for the sexes and everything else. It's like, if we're going to have women in there, well, then make them do every bit of the work that a man does.
Well, this is why they've switched from equality to equity, because equality wasn't giving them the results they wanted, because equality was saying like, okay, you can try out, but here's the standards. And then when the standards weren't met, it was like, well, now we need equity, because the only thing that explains disparity is sexism, racism, bigotry, whatever else, some sort of phobia, right? It couldn't be that, hey, maybe this is not very conducive.
The problem is that equality was the Trojan horse for equity.
Yes.
That's
well, because all this eventually fit into like, hey, General Milley, back to wanting to understand critical theory. What you should have got out of it is it's completely non-conducive to military operations, because it seeks to place everybody into oppressor and oppressed classes, not based off of individual actions, but off of superficial characteristics. Now, if you couldn't ascertain that that was probably going to be a problem for a military unit that you're going to send off into some pretty dangerous situations, then maybe you shouldn't be in the position you're in. But anyways, I already got to apologize because I shouldn't have sworn. I apologize.
So people were saying you need to put $1 in like the square jar or something.
Put $1 milkshake in that. No.
We'll bleep it out. We'll bleep it out. But I apologize. I shouldn't have lost my cool on that, but it infuriates me. All right. So we already seen this happen. I've had some personal experiences with it on how does this thing happen through the long march with the institutions. And again, it always starts off, James Lindsay talks about this too. The statement is always this idea about equality or a seat at the table. Or just understand our perspective of where we're coming from. And then it's accommodations. You have to adjust the way your organization behaves. And then now we have to lead the organization. We have to tell you, and then they exclude you from the conversation. That's how this process works. And it was achieving that within the military, in part because the military as an institution is difficult to take over. But once you get enough people within senior command, things can happen very, very quickly. How quickly? Well, several years ago, we were just talking about who should be able to potentially serve in some of these units. And then we went to stuff like drag shows on base. The military is paying for. We're not talking about the military allowing something to take place or allowing you to attend something. We're talking about the United States military is going to actively fund and promote
for families
these activities for families.
With
for
kids.
Families. Okay. And then I also want to get into this. This is not technically military. This is the intelligence community. But we got a couple ads I want to go through. This first one is one from the CIA. So let's click on this.
You'll have to tell me when to stop.
I want you to think about some of it. We're going to stop throughout this and we're going to assess some of it.
Even though the CIA is not really military, it's like paramilitary.
Well, no. CIA is intelligence community, but they also have They have paramilitary wings. They have what they
The
call
CIA
ground
has a
branch.
paramilitary
They have
wing?
ground branch, and they have things like that conduct military operations. I have friends that served in ground branch. Like Sean Ryan. Sean Ryan served in some of the operational wings. You have the intel analysis side. You also have like kind of more like what we call the James Bond stuff, like the clandestine stuff, running sources. But then you also have operations where you need an armed component that is conducting military operations, and that also exists within the agency. But keep in mind, this is what we're thinking of with the CIA, right? You're conducting intel and out. There's other branches too. There's logistical wings. You're conducting intelligence analysis. That's, a lot of that is more of the kind of sitting in the rooms in Langley or in other places, looking at data, conducting all sorts of intelligence analysis, developing products, things like that. Then you have the operational wing out in the field where you might be doing like human intelligence or things of that nature. But then you also have elements within the agency that are actually conducting, ground military operations, usually by, through, and with local indigenous forces, doing some of the role that you would see like Green Berets do, et cetera. All right. So this is a recruiting ad for an organization that does the things I just described. Go ahead.
When I was 17, I quoted Zora Neale Hurston's How It Feels to Be Colored Me in my college application essay. The line that spoke to me stated simply, I am not tragically colored. There is no sorrow dammed up in my soul nor lurking behind my eyes. I do not mind at all. At 17, I had no idea what life would bring, but Zora's sentiment articulated so beautifully how I felt as a daughter of immigrants then and now. Nothing about me was or is tragic. I am perfectly made. I can wax eloquent on complex legal issues in English while also belting Guayaquil de mis amores in Spanish.
Pause. Okay.
Good for you.
I love
What
seeing
does that
the
have to do with the
feminist-
CIA?
We're quite a ways into this.
Yeah.
What does any of this have to do with protecting the country from, enemies? What
This
have any
is
of
just
that to do with the
basically
core
look
mission
how
of this?
great my self-esteem is.
Oh, I love her wearing the feminist shirt with the clenched fist and
Yeah.
the Venus symbol.
So because
earlier.
I know that when you go to the Women's March in DC, that's like primal recruiting ground for Central Intelligence
As if any
Agency.
of us needed more reasons not to trust the CIA.
All right, but here's the deal. It gets worse. Go ahead.
I can change a diaper with one hand and console a crying toddler with the other. I'm a woman of color. I am a mom. I am a cisgender millennial who's been diagnosed with
cisgender.
generalized anxiety disorder.
Pause.
She's been diagnosed with generalized
millennial.
who's been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder.
So let me get this straight. The only thing that she has talked about so far that I actually thought was a relevant capability is being able to soothe a toddler or what is it? Soothe an infant while disciplining a toddler or something like that. I can't remember what it was.
And being very comfortable in her skin, but she's been diagnosed with general anxiety disorder.
Now-
So it's like, what?
I love it that it's like, okay, that's what we're putting at the top of the resume. That's what we're putting at the top of the resume.
But like her whole spiel just contradicted itself.
Yeah.
She's talking about how proud she is of herself and how, how great she is and all of these good
And she's
things about
perfect.
herself and how good she feels about it, and then turns around and says she's been diagnosed with general anxiety disorder.
She's not contradicting herself. The left takes pride in the things that
in the
make
mental
them
disorders.
that makes them outcasts from quote unquote normality.
Yeah.
There's a tweet by somebody else, not me, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I can't remember it exactly. But this one account tweeted once, and it pops up as a meme every now and then, like, reminder that communism is just when hideous dysgenic freaks take over the government and then make it illegal to be normal while they rob, steal, and kill from everybody else to satiate their own petty vengeance and grievance. Everything else is just window dressing.
Has she said the word the
No.
acronym CIA
No,
yet?
no.
She still hasn't.
No, I think we're like a
Wow,
minute in.
we're
Yeah.
a
All right,
minute
go
and
ahead.
12 seconds into this
You want me to
thing.
keep going?
Oh yeah. No, I had to see it. You do.
Okay.
But my existence is not a box-checking exercise. I
Oh.
am a walking
Pause. Real quick. She just went through a box checking exercise and then talked about her existence is not a box checking exercise.
I can't believe the CIA's checking their boxes.
This is why we can't have nice things. All right, go ahead. Play.
declaration. A woman whose inflection does not rise at the end of her sentences, suggesting that a question has been asked. I did not sneak into CIA. My employment was not and is not.
Okay, CIA at minute 30.
If you had snuck into CIA, that would be the only relevant piece of information you've given us so far about being a member of CIA. I actually would have been impressed by that. If you had said, hey, I got all this mental anxiety and, look, I'm pretty much a woke feminista, but I snuck into the CIA, I'd be like, oh, potential. But
Stealth mode.
She didn't even do that. That's not even a core capability. All right, go ahead.
Of a fluke or slip through the cracks. I earned my way in, and I earned my way up the ranks of this organization.
Through diversity, equity, and inclusion.
I know what I'm thinking about.
Diversity is how she snuck in.
I'm thinking about this idea of
I love
somebody
how they give awards for diversity. What's your achievement? Being a minority, what was it? Cisgender, heteronormative.
Look at all my intersectionality points.
Latina woman of color who has been diagnosed with, what was it? Generalized anxiety disorder. Like, that's your achievement?
I mean,
we're going to give you an award for that?
Think about this for a second, right? There was a time in my life where I considered applying for the agency. And it was actually kind of toward the end of my SF service where I was like, I think I'm going to get out.
Coincidentally, it was when he was questioning his gender.
No, that's not
What?
true.
He was going to become a woman so that he could get in under this diversity, equity, and inclusion crap.
I'll tell you what it was, is I was doing, deployments with 1st Special Forces Group, loved being a Green Beret, loved the mission of SF, but we had all of these the amount of bureaucracy we were having to go through to do our jobs was just getting insane. And I had some buddies that had been loaned out to the agency to do some work over in Afghanistan. And I'm talking to them about their experience and they loved it. They felt like they finally got to operate as a true Green Beret. I was like, well, that's what I want to do. And so, but I mean, think about the sort of people that are generally considering going into the CIA. It's usually people because they want to track down terrorist networks or they want to be James Bond, right? That's what they want to be. They want to be James Bond. And in fact, if you look at the origins of Special Forces and the CIA, they both kind of came out of OSS, the Operation or Organization for Strategic Services. They came out of OSS. One branch went the SF route, and then one branch kind of went the CIA route, right? So they all they have a similar lineage. Who in the is watching this and thinking, gosh, this is exactly what I was hoping CIA would be about. I was hoping that one day I could list off all my intersectional qualities and then eventually get into the CIA so I could become the sort of person that wins the Equal Employment Opportunity and Diversity 2019 Exceptional Service Award. Like the same award I could win by working as a teacher's aide at Cal Berkeley.
The idea that you actually earn, the word earn doesn't even belong in there.
Anyway, all right, let's go a little bit more.
Can I point out that this was given in Trump's first administration?
2019. Yeah.
He was president at the time. That's not a ding on Trump,
but
it's
it is a ding on that is why he needs to go through everything is because the bureaucracy's been in control for a very long time.
Yeah.
And the presidents didn't have all that much control other than, appointing who they could appoint.
Nick, before we continue this, you asked a question just a second ago about who on earth would be looking at this and excited. Tina just articulated who would be excited about this. The progressive managerial class would be excited about this because they've hijacked these agencies. Like this is who the marketing is directed to, right? It's not directed at you.
No. Yeah, in fact, it's meant to repel me.
Yes.
The last thing they want.
It's gatekeeping.
Is guys like me. All right, go ahead and hit play.
Right.
We're almost done, I promise.
I am educated, qualified, and competent. And sometimes I struggle. I struggle feeling like I could do more, be more to my 2 sons. And I struggle leaving the office when I feel there's so much more to do. I used to struggle with imposter syndrome, but at 36, I refuse to internalize misguided patriarchal ideas of what a woman can or should be.
Oh my gosh.
I am tired of feeling like I'm supposed to apologize for the space I occupy rather than intoxicate people with my effort, my brilliance. I am proud of me, full stop. My parents left
Intoxicate
everything
people?
they knew and loved to expose me to opportunities they never had. Because of them, I stand here today a proud first-generation Latina and officer at CIA. I am unapologetically me. I want you to be unapologetically you, whoever you are.
Pause.
Know your worth.
I guarantee you, she does not want you to be unapologetically you if you're anything like us.
Yeah,
Like, she definitely
exactly.
does not. Definitely does not. But I mean, just patriarchal. It's like, oh my gosh, this sounds like a seminar out of the sociology department at Cal Berkeley. Right, but this is what they were using to recruit for the CIA.
And they had her deliver it in such an arrogant
Yes.
cadence. They didn't even try to get you to sympathize and be
No.
like, wow, she's really strong. Instead, you're kind of like, man, she's kind of a bee. What's up?
It's a form of ideological gatekeeping.
Yeah.
This is a sign to the rest of the world. We have hijacked this institution. It is ours.
Yes.
This is the criteria that you must pass in order to gain entry into the institution.
Yeah.
This is what this is. It's not an open letter to be you, right? She's lying when she says that I want you to be you, because
Yeah.
if be you means be a patriarchal, white, straight male, Christian male, right?
Yeah. She definitely does not want you to be.
I guarantee you the people who produced this video do not want white, straight, Christian, right-wing men
Yeah.
in the CIA.
Yeah.
They don't want those people.
Loyal to Law said she is practicing imposter syndrome. Yeah, it's like I got bad news for you. If you've got imposter syndrome, that is the one diagnosis that you have that is probably accurate. All right, let's go to the next one, because that was the CIA. But I gotta say sorry to Nate. I gotta say sorry to our producer Nate, because he's a proud former sailor, and we're gonna pick on the Navy here a little bit, but if it makes you feel any better, we'll pick on the Army immediately after. All right, here we go. Right here. This is the Meet the Navy's drag queen, Harpy Daniels.
Harpy.
This is a part of their recruitment. Go ahead.
I can't believe I'm
Good
about to watch
heavens.
this.
Oh yeah.
Herpes.
This is the Navy many of us picture, fit and fearless sailors defending our nation. But this is also the Navy, a push to show just how inclusive the armed services
Wow.
can be and is.
The adventure is what has kept me in the Navy. Even now, I never thought
Pardon
I'd
me.
be
Pause.
Oh, no, he's got one of those
All right,
voices.
all
Kept
right,
me
Nate.
in the Navy.
All right, Nate. Is it the adventure that kept it in the Navy, or was it perhaps being trapped at sea with a bunch of strapping young men?
Damn, you went there.
Oh my gosh! Something kept this guy in the Navy. I don't think it was. Well, it's not the sort of excitement that was typically advertised for people to join the military. But
You know what's funny?
Yeah.
When this video goes out, Hamilton is gonna like end up looking at the bottom of the thing to see the watch rate, and we're gonna see the watch rate like collapse right when.
All I know is that his drag name is Harpy.
yeah, that sounds a little sexist.
It sounds like it's for kids. It sounds
Oh.
like we want to show all this to kids, don't we?
Yeah, the U.S. Navy expands recruitment efforts with one of their own, and yeah,
With one of
One of their own. Is the Navy
wow.
known for?
I just got to say, like, as soon as this ad came out, everybody in the Marine Corps and the Army was like, "Yeah, that checks out," and everybody in the Air Force was like, "Thank God, someone's finally taken all the heat off of us for a while." All right, okay, but just to be fair, I'm gonna have to trash the Army now. Because
I've seen this ad.
yeah, here was the Army ad. This was again the ad that the Army thought, you know what? How do we recruit the next generation of people they're going to close with and kill the enemy? Right? These are the sort of people that are going to get knock in the middle of the night, flashbang, go in, head of the stack, and get into gunfights in Fallujah. This is the ad that will reach into the soul of such people and say, yes, join the Army.
Rekindle that warrior
Re-
spirit.
No.
Yeah.
The only thing warrior about this is that shattering of the glass
Whoa!
ceilings.
Stop
Shattering
what are you doing
stereo-
spoilers for?
What do you mean spoilers?
This is why we don't. This is why, honey. This is why we mute
This
you
is why
sometimes.
women aren't supposed to
This
be
is
in
why-
these things, right?
You sometimes.
You'll
All
never
right.
get a boat with that domineering tone.
Okay, let's go ahead and watch. This is the U.S. Army Emma, The Calling. Go Army in 2021. All right, let's go ahead and check out this this marketing campaign by the Army.
This is the story of a soldier who operates your nation's Patriot missile defense systems.
Pause. Just to give everyone an idea, at this particular time in U.S. history, Patriot missile defense systems were actually pretty critical for protecting both military and civilian populations. So she just told you this is a story of a soldier that's responsible for this sort of activity. Go ahead.
It begins in California with a little girl raised by 2 moms.
2 moms.
Pause.
I've seen this before. I know where it's
Emma,
going.
I'm going to tell you right now, one of them didn't have
Not a
much to
great
do with
start.
you being kind of like here.
You
Not a
technically
gr-
can
not a
only
great
be related
start.
to one of them.
I'm gonna tell you right now, one of them you are not biologically related to. At least let's hope
One of
not.
them is an
I'm going to say something that will irritate these two. I knew it was going to end poorly when I heard this is a story that begins in California.
All right, play.
Oh, it sucks because California's gorgeous.
Although I had a fairly typical childhood, took ballet,
Oh yeah, so
played
typical.
violin, I also marched for equality.
Pause. Pause. Only in California is this a typical childhood. I had a typical childhood raised by my 2 moms. I did ballet, violin, and then marched in a bunch of
In gay pride parades.
All right, go ahead.
I like to think I've been defending freedom from an early age.
Oh, good. Yeah. So you've been brainwashed.
When I was 6 years old, one of my moms had an accident that left her paralyzed. Doctors said she might never walk again. But she tapped into my family's pride to get back on her feet, eventually standing at the altar to marry my other mom. With such powerful role models, I finished high school at the top of my class, and then attended UC Davis, where I joined a sorority full of other strong women. But as graduation approached, I began feeling like I'd been handed so much in life, a sorority girl stereotype. Sure, I'd spent my life around inspiring women, but what had I really achieved on my own? One of my sorority sisters was studying abroad in Italy. Another was climbing Mount Everest.
Pause. I love it's like what I had really achieved on my own. One of my sorority sisters was studying abroad in Italy.
How's that an achievement?
Is that like an achievement? Is that
Studying
an
abroad in
accomplishment?
Italy. Translation: she's banging a bunch of Italian
Oh my
dudes.
Anyway, you know what? We're just gonna leave it there. Go ahead, next one, play.
I needed my own adventures, my own challenge. And after meeting with an Army recruiter, I found it. A way to prove my inner strength and maybe shatter some stereotypes along the way. I'm U.S. Army Corporal Emma Malone Lord, and I answered my calling.
Pause.
Okay, so this was purely a way for her to prove something. It was purely a way
Yeah.
to shatter some stereotypes along the way. It was something that was hers, and she gets to do this. Do you hear anything about duty or honor or putting other people first? Do you hear anything about rescuing people, saving lives, preserving our American dream? Like, do you hear anything that sounds like anything?
It's all self-actualization.
It's selfishness. It's all pure, like, I'm doing this purely to prove a point for.
I don't know what you're talking about. When I
for
see
the
this,
ideology.
when I see this, that aristocratic warrior spirit, whatever, that gets rekindled. Like when I see this, I just immediately think of Antigonus the One-Eyed, right? Like
I just want to charge a valiant, I just want to charge my death in a valiant last stand to defend my country, just like my 2 moms taught me.
It's
Yeah.
so funny how we go to these extreme extents to ignore the very obvious things that motivate people to enter into military service. If you read any sort of history, and Nick and I are a fan of this because remember when we did our podcast about Rome, the 2-part series?
Yeah.
And in our spare time, we'll talk about, ancient history and stuff like that. And there's always these reoccurring themes that it's no, these guys do this because that's the only way they know how to live, right? It's not necessarily about themselves. It's about answering a much higher calling. It's not a selfish thing. It's not an identity thing. It's not a woke thing. It's Again, the best term that I can describe it is there is that like warrior spirit that exists in people. This is not it.
The push for, interestingly enough, the push for a lot of this didn't start this blatant, right? It started off this idea that, men don't fight and die for their country. They fight and die for the man to their left and right. And it's like, I didn't know the man to my left and right before I joined the military, right? I didn't know them, but I still joined for volunteer force. So why'd I do it? And the reason why I believe so many in Hollywood or academia is they were trying to elevate this notion of it's just for the man to your left and right. It has nothing to do with God and country. It has nothing to do with anything higher. It's just that, right? Is because it does a couple of things. One, they don't like you. You're the sort of person that goes off and fights wars. You're mean, you're bad, you're aggressive, you're toxically masculine, you're all that. They don't like you. But society does in some part depend on you, and society does in some part like you. So how do they give you some sort of credit? Well, they make it all about the fact that you're a victim fighting a war that you had no say over, right? You're a victim all the way up into that one glorious moment where you made a valiant stand for the person to your left and right, because they can imagine themselves in that scenario where, of course, I would be brave for someone I truly love, but to be brave for your country, well, that's provincial, right? That's at best kind of a naive viewpoint. And so now they can give you some form of credit as being something of a noble savage, right? You have the courage like a dog does, defending their owner. And so that's your little pet that you get, but that's all you are. The idea that no, we actually do believe in something like we do believe in our country. We do believe in God. We do believe in sacrificing for something that we believe is bigger than ourselves. And yes, you're absolutely correct that in that moment where you are fighting and you are absolutely concerned about the well-being of the person to your left and your right because you have trained with them, you've lived with them, you've fought alongside them, and you want them to be able to come home. Absolutely. But you also believe in that mission that you're doing. And yes, there have been plenty of times where I've been frustrated with U.S. policy, plenty of times where I've wondered why we were doing something the way we were doing it. But I still believed in my country. I still believed that there was a higher calling, that there was something that I was operating in service to, and that my conduct mattered, not just for the person to my left and right, but it mattered for God, it mattered for country, it mattered for my family, it mattered for all of those things. And the attempt to try to separate the action from all of those other things, I believe was intentional. I don't believe it was accidental. I believe it was absolutely intentional. And it was the first way that Hollywood kind of worked their way into this idea of that we're going to praise the individual action of heroism, but then we're going to assign a different meaning toward it. To where eventually and over time, this is all about you. It's all about you. It's all about your goals, you shattering. And in fact, the only real noble mission beyond your own self-actualization is achieving some sort of woke progressive objective. You're shattering a glass ceiling.
Which means she's furthering a cause.
You're defeating the patriarchy.
Yeah.
None of it has to do with actually standing up to defend your country.
It is self-actualization.
And it's to further the cause that she was raised with.
Yeah.
Like that was her cause, and she did this purely to
further that
raise
cause.
that cause.
To your point, historically, now there's a danger. I actually know why this is happening, because if you go far enough back, there's a danger in this motivation, because if it's not grounded in something that is the truth, I would argue if it's not grounded in Christian values, it can actually manifest itself in very dangerous ways. But historically speaking, warriors and soldiers, right, going all the way back to, Cyrus and Alexander, were motivated by something far more than their internal self-actualization. This wasn't Maslow that was dictating, the fates of Gaugamela, right? What it was is that, no, I'm doing this in service of a much more noble, higher pursuit than my own individual self, or the men beside me, or the commanding officer, or even the king for that matter. I'm doing this because, again, it's the only way I know how to live. This is me manifesting a much higher calling. Now, I would argue that it can be dangerous, that motivation, when it's like, there's actually to me, there's an example of this that I remember when I read the book, The Forgotten Soldier, which is it's a great book if you ever get a chance to read it. But the TLDR is that it's a French kid, he's like 16, who lives in Alsace-Lorraine, right after the Nazis conquer France. And because he has like, I think a German mother or something like that, the Germans are like, congratulations, you're a German citizen, which means we're not going to ship you off to the Eastern Front and fight the Russians. Yeah. And so there's this guy that doesn't even speak German. He's a French kid. Yeah. And he's like fighting in the German army on the Eastern Front. And he's like, he doesn't even know why he's there. And he gets like these lectures from his commanding officers about these same principles, actually.
Yeah.
But we know from our perspective that, yeah, but there's no Christian element there, right? There's no higher purpose because it's in service to an evil end. And so that warrior spirit, right, that aristocratic spirit is to a destructive end. And so I think that part of the reason we have this wokeification of the military is because we look at stuff like that and we say, well, we need to eradicate that because we can't control that. That's dangerous.
Yeah.
Well, no, what's dangerous is divorcing that higher calling from a moral lawgiver.
Yeah.
But saying that therefore the higher calling is bad and that the only driving force for wanting to serve in the military is self-actualization is actually incredibly self-destructive. Yeah. So I'm sorry that I went off on a bit of a philosophical tangent.
It's true. We have a question here. Loyal to Law said, how do you explain Tulsi Gabbard? And I'm asking just in case leftists are wondering about her. I don't think Tulsi Gabbard's difficult to explain at all. I mean, I said at the very beginning of this, you can be on the left and still love your country and still want to serve your country, and you can serve faithfully within the military. It's the question of what kind of left, right? Tulsi Gabbard, I think one of the things that happened with Tulsi Gabbard is that she went in kind of having more of what we would call a liberal viewpoint on things like social policy. But she was also really frustrated by things that she saw happening within the military, within the intelligence community. She was frustrated by cronyism, which is a shared frustration. And originally she thought, well, the way that we're going to solve all this is through more nobler government that's going to come in and achieve greater justice. And I think over time, the conclusion she came to, and I don't want to speak for her, was that no, the government actually was a big source of the problems that she saw, and that it wasn't going to be solved purely by putting better people in charge, but by being a little bit more cautious about what roles and responsibilities we give to the government. And so I think, and again, I'm very supportive of Tulsi, especially in the position that she's going to occupy, because I think she's someone that has demonstrated courage, and also served her country incredibly faithfully. And I think she's going to insist on high character within these organizations. And so even though there's areas where Tulsi and I don't agree, I think Tulsi is a person of character. And that's where I go into this larger argument that this isn't, it's not that any of this should be exclusively defined by political categories. A lot of it has to do with character. The problem is that when you look at modern woke progressivism, it's rooted in critical theory. And I'm sorry, but critical theory is antithetical to American tradition. It has a worldview. It has a way of viewing things within society that is antithetical to the fundamental principles which makes up America. And so the two can't coexist peacefully. And I don't think Tulsi was ever that. I don't think Tulsi was ever like, a hardcore woke critical theory progressive. So that's what I would say is I think the overall difference there. All right, we're going to shift now. So this is where the military was at. So for anybody telling me that I'm blowing this out of proportion or this is ridiculous or nobody wants to, yes, they did. And it showed in the way they recruited. It showed in the things that they elevated. It showed in the things that those organizations chose to project to potential recruits. Now let's look at some sort of Army advertisement. I mean, this is on U.S. Army YouTube page. This is something that recently came out. It's 14 seconds. But this is something of a new recruiting effort on behalf of the Army in the Trump administration, Pete Hegseth era. Go ahead, Christian. Go ahead and hit play. So it's a guy chalking up to do a deadlift. A lot of weight.
Stronger people are harder to kill.
That's it. That's it.
Stronger people are
Guy
harder to kill.
Deadlifts like 500 pounds, then picks up a rack and walks with it. Dude is just a jacked, tatted up guy that you definitely think can handle himself in a bar fight. And it's just showing him lifting all that weight, walking with it, and be like, stronger people are harder to kill. Period. The end. U.S. Army, baby. Oh my God. I saw that. And I was like, we're back.
And there are some other Army ads too. I don't know if we're going to show them today or not, but there are some that are much more in line with like the 90s Army recruiting where
Yeah.
it's like all, it looks like the movies. It's super, super cool. And,
Oh, it was funny at the same
back
time.
to like, do you want to be tough?
When these ads first came out, the Emma ad and the CIA ad that we went through, me and a buddy of mine who was an Army major, he had served overseas as well, and he's also a comedian. We sat down and we compared the commercials we were putting out versus the commercials China and Russia were putting out.
Yeah.
And the difference is you could tell a commercial that was designed to achieve some sort of woke objective versus a commercial that wanted to recruit people to fight and die for their country. Because the one in China was all about, we have always been here, and it's the Red Army, and it's conducting live fire exercises and missiles going off. Same way with the Russian one, right? The Russian one is all about a recruit, and he's like jumping out of an airplane and then getting a sniper rifle ready and then taking out a terrorist in the head. Like nothing in there is like, my general anxiety makes me strong. Like none of that is going on. It's all about join the Russian military to kill terrorists by shooting them in face.
I'm sure that people would. I'm sure your general anxiety will carry you very far in the Donbass.
Yes, yeah. In the Donbass right now, there's someone walking around here like, I'm here to end the patriarchy. Like that is not a thing. Like drone strike. Anyway. So we automatically see that, boom, here we go. We're already back with a very, very simple mission. If you're stronger, you're harder to kill. Oh my gosh, I love it. But it isn't in there. Pete Hegseth, let's go to the first article here. All right, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says no more DEI, Department of Defense, no exceptions. In fact, he even went so far as like to cancel all of these celebrations for all the various months we have. We have, this history month and that history month and this history month. And people are like, oh my gosh, I can't believe he's doing this. I saw as a member of the House of Delegates got up and was talking about how mad she was that Trump and Pete Hegseth had, it resulted in removing education about the Tuskegee Airmen in an Air Force basic training course. And I got up and responded to it. And I said, no. The moment Pete Hegseth figured out what they did, he immediately reinstituted the courses on the Tuskegee Airmen and the women that had served in pilots in World War II. Now, why did he do it? If his actual objective was to get rid of any history of the Tuskegee Airmen, why did he immediately reinstitute it? And it's because that was never the objective. And it's obvious it was never the objective. What they're trying to do is get rid of programs which elevate superficial characteristics over things that really count with respect to doing the job. And so this is what we call malicious compliance. It's when somebody pretends to be implementing a policy when in reality they're attempting to subvert it. Now, if you're a mid-level bureaucrat whose entire existence and paycheck within the U.S. military is rooted in some sort of DEI-related contract, and you want to try to save it, well, what do? You give your buddies in Congress and in state legislatures the talking points they need. So what do? You go right for a course on the Tuskegee Airmen and you remove it like, oh, I'm just implementing the no DEI policy. Oh, really? You want to know what's so ironic about that? The Tuskegee Airmen were the victims of a government policy which elevated superficial characteristics over capability and character. Kind of like DEI programs, right? The Tuskegee, you don't get rid of DEI by getting rid of the Tuskegee Airmen. You get rid of DEI by talking about the Tuskegee Airmen, because that's exactly what we don't want in the United States military, or preferably anywhere in society. We don't want people being denied access to opportunities because of their skin color, which is what DEI in effect is doing. And they want to pretend like it's not. But when the only way to achieve equity is equality of outcomes, then you are by definition going to refuse opportunities to better qualified candidates in order to put somebody else in there, not based off of their ability to do the job, but based off of something superficial. And what we're finding out is that has you might be able to get away with stupid crap like that at the sociology department at some university. But all of a sudden, when it's the fire department in Southern California, well, now it has some very real consequences, doesn't it? Well, the same thing's true of the military. So Pete gets rid of it. He gets rid of this DEI. He gets rid of these various things because what does he want? He wants the military to focus on being a cohesive unit, regardless of superficial characteristics. I can tell you right now that contrary to the opinion of the DEI advocates, contrary to the opinion of the assistant chief in LA in the fire department that said, when somebody shows up, you want them to look like you. When I'm in a dangerous situation, when I'm in a crisis situation, or when I'm responsible for going and dealing with a crisis situation, you know who I want to be surrounded by? Competent people. You know who I want my family saved by if I can't be there to do it? Competent people. Don't care about their skin color. Do not care.
No.
I want
I don't want
competence.
somebody that looks just like me. I'd be really scared for my safety if it was somebody that looks just like me. I want the biggest, baddest, muscle-bound person possible to pull me and my family out of a fire or whatever it is. I want to know the person's not going to, collapse halfway through saving us.
Yeah. Well, and that's the difference. And here's the beautiful thing about it. My dad shared this story with me once. My dad was LAPD in the 80s and 90s. And he remembers, I think it was sometime in the early 90s where it was either the early 90s or 80s where the affirmative action rep for the LAPD came in and was talking about their affirmative action programs and how great they were. And he goes, I'll never forget. He goes, there's this one sergeant, real good guy. He was a black sergeant, and he raises his hand and he goes, I hate your affirmative action programs. And the guy that was doing it does what every, white liberal does. He acted stunned. Like, how could you as a minority not recognize the wonderful thing that we white liberals are doing for you? And he goes, it doesn't matter that I scored in the top 5% of everybody taking the sergeant's test. You've turned me into the black sergeant. Because I don't want to be the black sergeant. I want to be the sergeant. I want to be the guy that earned my place. He goes, but you've created conditions where it is not unreasonable for someone to assume that maybe I got to my position not because of my competency, but because you gave me a carve out. He goes, that's not good for the overall functioning of the department. And it's absolutely true. One of the things I loved about serving in the military, especially serving in places like Special Forces, is because you felt like, for the most part, everybody that was there, regardless of their background, regardless of their skin color, regardless of where they might have been born, regardless of their family situation, everyone earned their spot. Now, there's always exceptions, right? There's always people that you thought, how in the heck did you get here? But we all respected one another for the competence and for the difficulty and the challenges that we all had to go through in order to get to where we were at. And we saw more people fail than succeed. And so we knew it was difficult. We knew it was hard. And then when you get to your unit and you're training with people and you're fostering those bonds and those relationships, and you're continuing to build upon that competency, that's what was important to us. Anybody that would try to occupy a special position based off of their race was a pariah to us. Like, you're a clown. Because we have important work to do. We have work that the ability to do it effectively determines the outcomes of who lives and who dies. It determines the outcome of whether or not we see our kids again. And if you're going to try to elevate something beyond your competency, capability, and character, I'm not interested. And thank God we've got, I think, a president and a secretary of defense that understands that. Because that's the part. And I'll say that this applies to both men and women, but I'm going to speak specifically for men because when I served in Special Forces, it was a men's only organization. The reason why we all trusted one another was because we all knew that we had gone through difficult things to get where we were at and we could be depended upon. And there was a special bond that was built from that. And the moment you start to screw with that bond by adding in additional criteria that has nothing to do with the mission to be performed, you cause mistrust. And you can look at there and say, well, that's your unconscious bias. No. The bias wasn't there because of anybody's skin color. The bias only gets put there when you add these additional criteria that don't have anything to do with the mission. I didn't wonder before. You're causing me to wonder because you set up a different standard. But guess what? None of us want it. None of us want the different standard because all of us want to be able to depend on the person to our right and left when we go into a dangerous situation. So don't you dare add additional criteria that has nothing to do with the sort of outcome that we need to achieve. Because it's not only dangerous for the unit, it's disrespectful to everyone that has had to go through this gauntlet in order to achieve something on the other side. How dare you create criteria or conditions where the sacrifice of somebody else that went through everything that I went through could be called into question? And that's what they're doing. And I would say that maybe they just don't understand that perspective. What I've come to the conclusion is they don't care. They don't care. Let's go to the next article here real quick, because this is another thing that I think is truly important. Trump mass fires military academies, board of visitors, and purge of woke leftist ideologies. Thank God, because this is one of the biggest ways that universities push this stuff is through boards of visitors. Because what they do is they set on these ideological activists that end up determining what the focus of the organization of the institution is. And so you wonder, how in the heck can we get into a point where a West Point cadet takes off his hat at graduation and he has a symbol in there that says communism will win? How do you get to that? Board of Visitors. So look, I am fully on board with this idea of canceling all of these policies, because it doesn't just create bad practical outcomes. It actually robs people of the respect they are owed for having gone through the same level of difficulty and challenges in order to achieve it. And how dare you do that to people? Because ultimately, they suffer, but then the people that we're supposed to operate on behalf of suffer as well. And there's just no place for it. But the good news is we're watching recruiting numbers come back. And there's some former Army officials, well, that started in August. That started in here. Okay, we'll see. We'll see, because recruitment has been a problem for the military for quite some time. And the way they've tried to boost those numbers is not by speaking to a sense of duty, honor, country into the hearts of young men and women that do want to genuinely serve their country. No, they do it by creating some sort of side quest, some sort of self-actualization. This is all about you, or this is all about breaking whatever glass ceiling or whatever else is there, real or imagined. It's about achieving some sort of woke progressive outcome. And now we're going to use the military as a mechanism in order to do that. It's about giving people more money or more bonuses or more college or more whatever else. And I think what we're going to start to see is a message that once again reanimates that aspect, that reanimates that desire to belong to something bigger than yourself and to be willing to undergo challenges, to be willing to face everything up to and including death in service to something you believe in. Not because they're going to pay off your college debt, but because you actually care about your country. Because guess what? You don't win wars with armies composed of a bunch of people who are out for themselves and bragging about their general anxiety disorder. You win wars and you win conflicts. You protect a nation and a way of life. You protect a constitution by finding people that believe in it. Not because you've sold them on a narrative, but because they genuinely see the benefits in living in such a society and want to take personal responsibility and ownership over protecting, preserving, and passing it off to future generations. And that is, I think, what you're going to see in the sort of recruitment we see in the future. And that's going to provide you the sort of military that you can be proud of and that will be effective in combat and that will not only win our wars, but bring more of our people home, led by a commander-in-chief that will not use them for cheap political purposes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for standing by in this episode. I'll apologize up front. I know I used some language. I know I used some language that wasn't necessarily appropriate. Well, we were kind of getting used to it with Tina. That's like, but
yeah. My language wasn't bad.
But look, the reason why, and I'm not saying this is an excuse. I'm not saying this is an excuse, but to give you an idea, I loved serving in the military. I really did. There was days where I obviously didn't like, things that were going on, but overall, I really have always respected it as a major institution within our military. A major institution within our society overall. And I was inspired from a very young age by reading the stories of men and women who are willing to sacrifice everything for something bigger than themselves. and when they put themselves in danger. And I remember wanting to be tested like this. And I've shared this story before, but it wasn't so I could get college money, or it wasn't so I don't know, I could peddle it for something else. I just remember my grandfather having these little framed pictures that he probably put all of $10 into. Just a little wooden frame, some felt, but it had pictures of my great-grandfather, my grandfather, and my father in their uniforms with their badges or the ribbons. And I remember thinking, one day I want to be on that wall. One day I want to be on that wall. One day I want to be able to add to this legacy that my family has built in serving and protecting and standing up for people and standing up for their country. I want to be able to do that. And, I just dropped my own son off to do the same thing. And so I want the military to be an institution. I want the military to be an institution that we can be proud of and that we can depend upon in this country, because I think it is critical in order to preserving our freedom and our way of life. So anyways, thank you very much for watching. If you think about it, definitely pray for Luke as he's going through his military service, he's going through his training. It was funny. I was joking around with him. I said, buddy, 6 months ago, I didn't know what your basic training was going to look like under the previous administration. But now I think it's probably going to be a lot closer to what I experienced, which is not a bad thing. It means it'll be tough, but it also means it'll adequately prepare you for the challenges that come ahead. So keep him in your prayers if you think of it. We'd really appreciate it. Once again, thank you very much for joining us, and we will see you next episode.